For the longest time, my relationship with God was, well, transactional. I looked at the world as this giant checklist of problems, and God was the ultimate consultant, the specialist I'd call in when I couldn't handle things on my own. So the question is, how do you break free from a life that's totally built on your own performance? How do you find something real? Well, let's get into it.
And this right here, this quote, really hits the nail on the head. See, my identity, my sense of who I was, it wasn't just connected to my ability to fix things, it was my ability to fix things. So if a project went south or a relationship felt broken and I couldn't fix it, well, in my mind, I had no value. That is a truly terrifying way to go through life.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning of all this. My entire operating system, the way I saw the world, was based on this one core belief. My main job was to be a human problem solver. And if that's your job, then your name for God is, pretty much, fix it.
And this is what that actually looked like day to day. My brain basically functioned like a Gantt chart of anxieties. I was constantly mapping out every possible thing that could go wrong and building contingency plans to stop it. It was just this relentless grinding pressure all the time, where any tiny little mistake felt like an absolute catastrophe. And living like that, the cost was huge. It wasn't some big dramatic explosion. It was more like a constant, low-grade humming exhaustion that never, ever went away. Just this frantic, hollow striving, because there's no finish line on that treadmill. Peace, contentment, not even on the table.
Of course, any system that's built on your own perfect performance, well, it's gonna collapse eventually. It has to, and mine sure did. So this next part is the story of what happens when the fixer just can't fix anything anymore.
The whole thing came crashing down, as these things often do, in front of everyone. I was in this super high-stakes presentation for a project I'd personally promised I could turn around. And a key stakeholder asked me this tough question I just hadn't seen coming, and for the first time in my professional life, there was just nothing. My mind was a total blank. The silence in that room felt like an eternity.
This quote just perfectly nails that feeling, doesn't it? It's that universal nightmare of being seen for what you fear you are, not good enough. In that single moment, my entire identity, the guy who could fix anything, the competent professional, it just, poof, evaporated. All that was left was the failure.
But the real rock bottom wasn't even in that meeting. It was in the quiet afterward. I was just sitting in my car in the parking garage, forehead on the steering wheel. There weren't any tears, just this profound, hollowed-out emptiness and one crystal-clear thought. I can't keep doing this. It wasn't a prayer, it was just a statement of fact. Total, complete defeat.
But that moment, that total surrender, it ended up being a doorway. I started looking for something new, not another productivity hack or a new system, but a completely different foundation to build my life on. And it all started with this one tiny idea that changed everything. The whole thing started to shift when I was listening to this podcast and they were talking about this idea that in the ancient world, a name wasn't just a label like it is for us. A name was a description of someone's essential nature, their character, who they really were. And then they said, this applies to God too. And then I heard this name for the first time, El Roi. It comes from the story of Hagar, an Egyptian slave who was cast out, totally alone and unseen in the desert. And the thought that there was a God whose very name, whose very character was the God who sees me, that was the first crack of light in that windowless room I'd been living in.
And here's why that was so huge. My fix-it God was Elohim, the distant, all-powerful creator. Cosmic, intimidating, a force you had to manage and, frankly, fear. But El Roi? That name suggested a totally different possibility. A God who is intimate, attentive, right here. A person you could actually know, not a problem you had to solve.
Okay, but an idea is one thing. How do you actually live it? I had to see if this could be more than just an interesting concept. So I decided to run a little experiment, just for myself, to see if this could actually change the way I felt and acted day to day. And the experiment itself was almost laughably simple. Every morning, I'd just write one of these names of God on a sticky note and put it on my monitor. Then, during the day, when that old familiar panic would start to bubble up, I'd force myself to just pause, stop, look at the note, and really focus on what that name said about God's character.
And here's how it actually played out. An unexpected bill shows up, boom, instant trigger for the old financial anxiety spiral. But instead of letting it run wild, I'd look at my note, Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. And I'm telling you, I could feel a tangible sense of calm. Or maybe I had a tough conversation coming up. My old self would be planning every attack in defense. Instead, I'd pray to Jehovah Ra'ah, the Lord is my shepherd, and that combativeness would just melt into compassion. The internal shift had a direct impact on my external actions. It was wild.
Now, I have to be really honest here. This was not a magic pill. It didn't instantly cure decades of anxiety. The gravitational pull of my old fix-it identity was incredibly powerful. This sticky note thing was a great tool, for sure, but I was about to find out that real, lasting freedom was going to require something much, much deeper.
All right, so that brings us to the final piece of this puzzle. Because real change, real transformation, it always gets tested by a setback. And it turns out my biggest setback was actually the setup for my biggest breakthrough.
A massive negotiation came up at work, and I basically told myself, this is too important for that new, soft approach. So I completely reverted. I went back to the old fixer, micromanaging every detail, working insane hours, trusting no one but myself. And the result? I blew it. I failed, spectacularly. And it honestly felt like all the progress I'd made was a complete and total lie. So in the middle of all that shame, I called a mentor and just laid it all out there. He listened to the whole pathetic story, and when I was done, he just paused and asked me one simple, devastating question. He said, "Who do you think you're working for?" And that question just shattered everything. So I went digging for an answer, and this is what I found. The word for Lord in the New Testament is the Greek word kyrios. It means master. And its direct counterpart, the other side of that coin, is the word doulos, which means slave. I had always thought of it as a partnership, but the language is really clear. It's about ownership.
And right then, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. The irony was absolutely stunning. My whole life, I had been on this quest for independence, to be my own master, to be in control. And it turned out that was the cruelest form of slavery there is. I was a slave to my own anxiety, a slave to my fear of failure. Real freedom wasn't in being independent, it was in surrender.
This really captures the whole shift. For years, I had treated God like a high-priced consultant, a fix-it specialist that I brought in on my projects. The truth I was finally starting to grasp is that God is Adonai. He is my Lord and my Master. I don't work for me anymore, I belong to Him.
So yeah, life is different now. The problems haven't all disappeared, that's for sure, but my posture toward them has totally changed. From frantic, anxious fixing to, well, submission. And if any of this story sounds even vaguely familiar to you, I just want to invite you to take one really small first step.
Let's just bring it all the way back to where my own journey started. If you don't know where to begin, maybe just start here, with this name, El Roy, the God who sees you. Right now, in this moment, exactly as you are. Not as another problem that needs to be fixed, but as a person who is deeply and completely known.